Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking with Fans People, and also guy who feels like he needs to make a local news video, which I mean specifically for TWFP and surrounding communities kind of local news. So, first thing I want to talk about is Peter Aga et al. I've been spending a long time on YouTube, and I've been spending a lot of that time, or at least when I'm talking about cognitive functions, in the last couple of years, explaining to everybody that I'm right, and exclusively so, and everybody else in the community who's not in agreement with me about how to understand things is incorrect, if to the extent that they are in contradiction with me. And I've been fighting this battle for a long time. So much so that perhaps I've failed to look around and notice that there is a small but growing cadre of very smart people who are agreeing with me. The conversation with Peter yesterday, which I typed in, even though he knew his type already, was really gratifying. You know, as was my conversation with Aga, and the thing is, I know I talk to a lot of smart people all the time, but because they're smart people, they aren't spending a lot of time telling me how right I am. and we're more involved in the process of being right and less in the reality of it. But when somebody really smart like Peter, or really smart like Aga, or there's somebody else who emailed me something that I found very telling, which was some private playlists they had made, and at the top of all these playlists were a bunch of mixes of videos about typology, and the more recent ones were all me. So that tells me that somebody's looking for the correct way and then settling on me. Now, presumably, you might go the other way around. They might start with me and settle on C.S. Joseph or something like that, but the people who I respect, the people who are ending up settling on me, frequently. And when they're obviously very smart people, then I think, okay, hey, look at this, Eric. Maybe you need to maybe it's time to transition from spending so much time telling everybody you're right to talking to those who accept that you are. Aga was specifically talking about how I deserve to profit more from my endeavors, and that's probably true. But we'll get to that later on. And I appreciate her efforts in thinking about that kind of stuff, you know, because it's something that I'm likely to underthink about myself. So, if you're new to cognitive functions and you happen on this video, this is not a good video to hear me talk about cognitive functions, but the bottom line is there's one correct interpretation of it, to the exclusion of all others, as this is usually the case when you're talking about something that's an actual model of something real in the universe rather than just an arbitrary taxonomy. And that we can genuinely understand how human beings represent 8 different blind spots and 8 different points of defensiveness or frames of defensiveness and attentional manners and all that kind of stuff in ways that are simulatable, that make concrete empirical predictions that then get validated time and time again, etc. So it's like around YouTube you really do have a bunch of posers and or people trying not to be pinned down and clear, and one guy who's trying to make it a serious intellectual endeavor, and that's here. So that somebody who's like studies theoretical physics discovers typology, is disappointed by what he finds across the board, and then settles on me and says, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, and I validate him publicly here in this typing session video for being right is so... I don't even care about this stuff really, you know? I'd really rather be a musician. Or a player with dolls. But I guess never really occurred to me how frustrated I was about a reality that's always been for me, which is being right and largely being surrounded by a world that doesn't recognize it. So, pretty powerful for me. Two, this notion of a meta actor, just catfishing with a glossy sheen of bullshit art around it, you know. The question of whether or not a certain maybe half dozen, maybe 10 people around the channel were alternate personality, alternate identities of Plub, of Blee and Blee Plub, has evoked some interesting commentary. I had a conversation last night with a group of GWFP people, and it was a wide-ranging conversation, but one of the things it touched on was this topic here, and we talked about Elise S., how she abruptly out of nowhere, after many relatively calm interactions or non-problematic interactions, tried to tell Rachel in a premiere I don't even think she was watching, that I was a controlling narcissist. Out of the blue, right? And so that was one of the data points I heard from CJ Winston's mom that caused a bunch of things to fall into place, kind of. So let me point to, in this conversation last night, as we were discussing Elise S., it turns out that Elise S., this is what the conclusion, I don't know how certain this is, but it's certainly plausible that Elise S. used the term meta actor before Blee and Blee Club used it, right? So, to me, that's like case closed. It's not that common a term. It's the kind of term that somebody who's engaged in a bunch of shady catfishing is going to be familiar with, possibly, as a way to excuse themselves from it. And neither Elise S. nor Blee and Blee Blub is intellectually robust in a way that suggests that they would normally use that term, right? So, to me, it's like case closed. Oh, well, there you have it. That proves it right there. Now, a more tricky point is KP, who had an equivalent kind of sudden blow-up departure. And I think it was while we were discussing Elise S., and pointing out that, I'm like, why would she accuse me of being a controlling narcissist? I'm obviously not, blah, 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 a bunch of stuff like that. And then KP says, if you guys are just going to circle jerk and lie and delude yourselves, I'm out of here. Well, of course, given what we were talking about right then, there's no lie or delusion of myself at all going on. It was a reasonable question and objection to an accusation I have faced from many people in the past. All of them like bad actors, right? Because it's not true at all that I'm a controlling narcissist or anything of the sort. Like, the idea that somehow I'm pushing Rachel around or controlling her or leveraging any kind of power differential is completely false. It's the exact opposite of what I do and how I roll. So the thing is, only bad actors ever accuse me of that because there's no legitimate cause for accusing me of that. Narcissists are not transparent, open, emotional, vulnerable, etc. Like all the things that I am. That's just that runs counter to the idea of dark triad stuff, because dark triad stuff is basically all built off of avoidance of accountability, and probably originally all built off of a destruction of trust early in childhood. But I don't know about that part for sure, because that's definitely true for BPD. I'm not sure exactly when, where, why BPD, sociopathy, psychopathy, etc. are exactly distinct from each other. They all manifest as variants of the same fundamental problem: accountability avoidance, an unwillingness to be the one who gets called to the carpet and held to account. I mean, everybody's got to experience that at some point in their life, but narcissists, quote unquote, don't. They avoid it at all costs, and they will stomp all over anybody to avoid it at all costs. So the fact that KP and Elise S and so forth are, behaving in ways that make me wonder, like, are they actual people or are they just fake identities of Pleienti Bleed Club? Well, naturally, in response to that, the people in the small group I was talking with said, well, let's be realistic about this. Who's going to hang around for an entire year building up this set of characters that they play just in order to someday point out and say, haha, I fooled you. Those people aren't real. I was just lying. And what's the point, right? Who puts that much time into such an endeavor? Well, that brings me to B here, RBR. So, about 20 years ago, just about 20 years ago, maybe 19, I was making a review podcast called Vox Monitor, and we did a bad review of a podcast called Red Bar Radio that engaged in exactly the sort of shit that we're talking about, which is catfishing stuff, basically. The episode of the show that we reviewed, we got to hear Red Bar Radio pull a catfishing prank kind of thing on an old lady over the phone, and it was cruel and it was bad and not funny at all. I mean, the thing is, both Core and I said right away, was like, the number one crime of this thing is it's not funny, and is attempting to be. So, okay, that guy, or people affiliated with him, or whatever, and probably him in many different sheep's clothings or whatever, has been lurking around my channel for years. My YouTube channel, that started something like 10 years after that podcast review podcast was over, was long over. And somebody comes in and reminds me of Red Bar Radio every couple of months, and has for years, and does that same sort of like approach of, you can imagine with the Red Bar Radio thing, whoever it is who's talking to me about Red Bar Radio, I'm assuming in every instance that it's some incarnation of that guy, because that's what he did. That's how he rolled, and I just roll my eyes like, okay, God, these idiots. It's like I can see right through your bullshit, Now, it is true that I afford people the basic benefit of the doubt that says, if you come in and act like a real person, I'm going to treat you like a real person. I'm going to assume that you're legit until you give me reason not to. And this has got to be the frustrating thing for somebody trying to fool me, is that it doesn't matter if you fool me, right? It's like, all it takes is one wrong thing for you to say, and you're still going to get caught, And so it's a whole lot of work for no particular reason that one can understand rationally, right? So, as far as Karma's Pimp goes, his YouTube channel, like, he joined in like 2014. So it's easy enough to say, well, that's definitely a real person. It's just coincidence there. Yeah, probably. Except, remember, this RBR guy has had multiple identities and has been working multiple catfishing angles for many years as part of an endlessly failing attempt to be funny, as far as I can tell. Now, the issue of Klaus, the real Klaus, whatever, came out, and whether or not he was a legit person. Well, so if Plub Blee and Blue Blee is going to impress me, then he is Klaus, because that would be totally out of character for everything else that he does that I'm thinking is attributable to him. Klaus seems to be genuinely intelligent and interacts in a different way than any of these other characters. So the thing is, the character range of the people or identities that I think might be catfishing is limited. The person who's making these different characters isn't ultimately very creative. They keep using concrete, like, distinctions, like character points, like I'm a lesbian who's homeless and whatever, those kind of things, rather than actually manifesting different ways of talking. Different, maybe there's a mixing up of capitalization or anything like that, or something like that, but there's consistently a lack of using punctuation and other indications that this person, whoever they are, no matter how hard they're trying, isn't intellectually robust enough to make intuitively deft distinctions between characters in their presentation of them. So if in fact this individual were to impress me with the quality of their catfishing, although I'd still think they were despicable for engaging in this approach towards things, because it's predicated fundamentally on dishonesty and lying, then they're also Klaus. But I seriously doubt that would disrupt the core mechanism of my intuitive conclusion here, which is a similarity and a lack of intuitive deftness in the rendering of all these characters, and etc. Now let me go down to so what is the conclusion to draw about the catfishing thing then? I don't know for sure. He's gonna make as much hay as he can out of his big reveal preview thing or whatever. I think it was Karma's Pimp as well who also said something like, that reveal felt more like the preview to a reveal, which would be like, it makes sense, right? That guy's going to come in and argue on his behalf, and he's going to be triggerable in ways that when he's called out on his own bullshit and he has to face his shit for a second, he freaks out and accuses me of being whatever and ditches, right? So that makes sense. But we'll find out what happens. It's, at the very least, what he's done with all of his effort is, all of his effort to engage me at all is, he successfully made me think about all this stuff and include this kind of stuff in a video. And that's the problem with even saying you're catfishing, even if it turns out it's not true, right? Is that it causes individuals to become suspicious of the ordinary others in their life. It's like in a nice community where everybody is mutually respectful. You don't really have to lock your doors. You don't have to worry about stuff getting stolen. But if you get a couple of thieves, then all of a sudden everybody's gonna lock their door and the whole thing's ruined for everybody in that regard, right? The same thing is kind of true with identity. If we're all basically going through our lives not playing roles that are fake, not trying to engage with other people predicated on a fundamental dishonesty, then everything goes more smoothly for everybody. If instead you've got somebody going around in disguises, pretending to be people in order to hold up some other party as an object of ridicule, well, obviously that's a way to make the streets of the metaphysical town trashy and horrible, And so it's not something we should reward, praise. It doesn't matter if it's successful or not, right? To the extent that it's successful, it's worse, because it just means the dishonesty was successful in lying to somebody else. Okay, number 3. I saw a video titled Discipline Makes You Happy by Teal Swan. It's like a year old, but I saw the title for it this morning. And, of course, I posted in the community tab, here's an alternative, or here's a better approach, eat, sleep, rave, repeat. Obviously, it makes me angry when I see titles like that, because Teal Swan doesn't even realize she's imposing a frame bias on everybody and assuming that this is a good advice for everybody else because it's good advice for her or something like that. The thing is, if you're TE, NE is a threat to you because it's what could possibly go wrong with your plans and disrupt them. And discipline is about eliminating extroverted intuition from your life, ultimately. So, is she sort of right that it makes you happy? Well, she's sort of right in the sense that everybody needs to be disciplined enough to get some things accomplished that are purposeful. But sometimes conditions have to be met. So this brings me back to the first point here, and some conclusions that I drew last night from because of a variety of reasons. So, Aga is correct that I deserve to earn more money from what I'm doing, and also Teal Swan's correct that if I were a little more disciplined about monetizing shit, that I'd be happier because money's pretty tight, and it's not too tight for me to get the things that I'm habituated to getting, weed and cigarettes and stuff, and not too tight for Rachel and I to get the things that we are habituated to getting, fast food and so forth. And I guess the same with weed is something we're habituated to getting, or things that even Rachel is habituated to getting, like whippets. But, money's very tight. So, like, yesterday when she was feeling like she needed to SE a little bit, like I need to 4-slot SE, and she went to the mall and spent like $55 on 3 articles of clothing because we were planning on going out last night, although we didn't end up going out because I had the my colon clog went into, like, okay, Eric, you've not been pooping well for too long now, and now you're going into crampy colon blow mode. Anyway, that took a little while to extricate from my system, and by the time we were ready to go, and we started talking about this money stuff, I was just like, forget it, let's just stay home. Anyhow, this is the problem that I see that as being, it's like Rachel's a canary in a coal mine for me. If her spending $50 every once in a while on some clothes because she feels the need to SE, causes me distress or causes us financial distress or worry or something, like, oh, we got these things coming up and we're going to have enough money, then I'm being too self-indulgent, right? It's like there's no reason why I can't make us more financially solvent. I've always been a good earner when I apply myself, if I decide to, So, in that regard, I need to remember that just because I'm disciplined enough for me doesn't mean I'm ultimately disciplined enough. And at the same time, I have to be realistic about how much self-discipline I can even potentially manifest. I'm limited in how much I can follow through on a plan for which there's no external structural leverage or control mechanisms. So my takeaway ultimately was this. I think what I'm going to do with the channel is I'm going to work on the thing that Aga and I talked about, which is this curriculum in which I teach cognitive functions and just set up like a class, which I have lots of experience building curriculum and lesson plans and stuff like that. I was a director of a school which I built the entire program architecture for, so I know how to chunk things out into units and present them as chunks of data and stuff. And August right that if I had that course all set up and done properly, I could probably make good money on one of those platforms that is for basically people who want to take a class in something from some kind of an expert or whatever. So, but at the same time, I also understand that the problem with this plan is that it requires me to complete a large-scale project before I earn any money from it or see any results. And that's always, it's like, okay, you have to be realistic, Eric, about who you are and whether this is going to be done in a timely enough fashion to make it worth all the effort, or how you can motivate yourself to continue pushing forward through it with it being such a distant outcome, like a distant end of the tunnel, right? Well, what I decided is this. I am going to enable finally, after YouTube prompted me to do so for many times, the memberships thing in my channel. The reason I've never never started that before is because I didn't have a clear vision of what I was going to offer members that I wasn't going to offer anybody else. So now I do. I'm going to work on this thing, and what I'm going to offer members is this: a continually updating document dump file in which I'll just save every document I make into that thing, unless it's like personal or something, like a letter to my mom's doctor requesting this thing. I'm not going to put that in there or something, but anything that's intellectual in nature, I'll put into that as I write documents. I'll just save them into there. Some of them will be about the curriculum, some of them won't. I've also put every curricular document I'm making in that folder. Well, everything. So in other words, the current document dump, which I published a video and a folder link to not that long ago, that'll just stay there, but it won't get updated. And the updated folder, I'll have an equivalent folder in the members area somehow, or some link to it. I haven't looked into how the specifics of setting this up yet, but and that'll update. And then additionally, any videos I make that are curricular, that go along with the curriculum, which I'll probably make it like, make the curriculum, make the video, make the curriculum, make the video, make the curriculum, make the video per class session, because I'm accustomed to breaking up curriculum into amount of class time I have. So if I've got 16 weeks and 2 hours a week, I've got 32 hours of class time or something like that. And then I'll break that into 32 1-hour chunks if it's a 1-hour class, and like that. So since these are videos and not classes, you figure half the amount of time or less, more like 20 minutes per lecture. Normally if you're going to teach something, you do about a third of the time lecture, a third of the time like some sort of work on the thing, and then a third of the time in some sort of drill on the thing. So like a drill would be like if you were if I'm teaching a grammar class, the drill is to get the students, sometimes in unison, sometimes one at a time, to go. Sink is the verb. Who sunk? Joe sunk. Therefore, Joe's the subject. Joe sunk what? Joe sunk ship. Therefore, ship is the direct object. Like getting them to talk through those scripts out loud or something, that's like a drill, and then having them diagram a sentence is like work, right? So that's normally how you break up a class. Of course, the thing is, in this setup, there's not going to be any drills, and there's not going to be any desk work, but I could potentially create a sort of quiz or self-assessment for understanding and learning for each couple of videos or something like that. Anyway, I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but that's what the member section is going to be for. It's going to be for the curricular videos and stuff, so that they have a purpose prior to me completing the whole project. Then after I've completed the whole project, I may end up, I don't know, I don't know, that's a long ways away. I have to think about it. Maybe at that point I'd move that whole curriculum thing over to this other platform, and then I'd talk to Aga probably, and we'd see how much work she's interested in doing and whatever. I don't know. The initial thing she said was like a 50-50 split on this, but when I looked at the amount of work that requires me to do, and she'd have to do a lot for it to be justified that way. Just conceptually being the one who's responsible for the idea of monetizing this fashion, that wouldn't be sufficient to justify that. So Anyway, regardless, I don't know how much work it would be on the platform end of it anyway. But there's probably an engagement with people, and you basically have to have a secretary kind of position or salesman kind of position that engages with people on your behalf if you're not going to do it yourself. And she doesn't want to do that. I can tell you that right now. Okay, so anyway, for me, discipline is not a good approach in general. Self-discipline, trying to get myself to be something I'm not, which is self-discipline, is not a good approach. Instead, however, a good approach is to recognize that I have periods of productivity and periods of fallow, and to try to take better advantage of those periods of productivity in terms of having some kind of overarching vision that's periodically correcting me back into the lane somewhat, and that's really the best I can do. If I were self-disciplined, I wouldn't be a better version of Eric. I'd be a different person. It's like, as an extroverted intuitor, I am not good at sticking with a long-term plan that requires me to work in secret for a long time before I actually extrovert my extroverted intuition into the world. It's implicit in being an extroverted intuitor. We can accomplish big projects that don't meet those criteria of pleasing to extroverted intuition, as I did with the curriculum at that school. It's not like I enjoyed sitting in the office and building a big ass fucking document of 400 plus pages of materials and whatever. But I had a boss and a job and a bunch of externalities that compelled me to get things done, even though I didn't want to. In the ideal scenario, those externalities naturally emerge from the value of what you're making and doing. So it's like, in an ideal scenario, because what I'm doing with cognitive functions is so true and correct and valuable, other parties come to me and say, I will help you manage yourself in exchange for increased access to your utility. This is what every ENTP and INTP alike wants, ultimately, although INTPs are even more babies than ENTPs about the whole thing. We want a mom to watch us work and tell us we're doing a good job and replace our self-discipline, basically. And some people might say, well, this is just an executive function disorder / you're just making excuses for yourself. No, I know who I am. It's like it's insane and ridiculous to say to somebody who's 50 years old like me, and perfectly happy by and large, in fact probably a little too happy, that my basic problem is a lack of self-discipline. First of all, who said I had a basic problem? I don't have a basic problem. That's the issue. It's like I don't have any basic problems, so there's not a strong impetus for me to change. And if I were to change, I might be more effective, but it's unlikely to come through increased self-discipline. Instead, it's likely to come through an idea that allows me to get work done that's purposeful, while concurrently not lying to myself about who I am, or about the extent at which people are malleable. So Teal Swan's lying to everybody when she's telling them they too can decide to be more disciplined. Doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. If you are fundamentally undisciplined, what you need to do is not commit to a sort of ideology of discipline good, self-indulgence bad. That is not a good way to approach anything, because ultimately you are who you've been and how you've been. Some aspects of your behavior may become contraindicative of your optimality. So I had to quit drinking because I couldn't handle alcohol. It was contraindicative of me being optimal. But I haven't had to quit smoking marijuana or cigarettes or something, because those are not contraindicative to me being optimal. I saw the other day in something that Swift Eagle, I think it was, posited, perhaps if you were going to say one thing negative about my and Rachel relationship, is that we may enable each other's bad habits. Well, I mean, that's the nature of what ssuartscire calls a mirage relationship. The reason Rachel and I have such a good relationship is because there's an acceptance of each other's fail spots. And it is true that the relationship between INFJ and ENTP is not one in which the other party is going to push the other party to be better. Instead, the improvement of each party is going to happen slowly, naturally over time. It's kind of a slow boil ontological improvement that comes from the ENTP generally being made calm and more NI aware by the ongoing presence of the INFJ, and the INFJ being less oppressively knowledgeable, or they're having their knowledge be less oppressive to them because of the presence of the ENTP, who can always interpret everything in a million different ways. And then coming to recognize the value and to trust in the intuition of the other party over time allows each of them to be liberated into a more optimal self. Because the thing is, both types are likely to have been externally constrained from the get-go and never really had the chance to, well, what if nobody's shaming or controlling me into some version of myself that's not my own indulgent manifestation of self. And I think it's important for everybody to at least have the opportunity to try that, right? Like to experience being exactly what they feel like being. There's all this focus on purposefulness in terms of the self-growth industry, you might call it. You know, you see these videos on YouTube about like, don't stop being addicted to dopamine, you know, no fap, all these weird nonsense like 4-slot NI things. But I ate nothing but grapes for 3 weeks, and now I've got magical powers. You know, that kind of nonsense. Teal Swan style nonsense in general. You got all that stuff out there, and it's all fixated on ultimately the notion that there's something wrong with you, and that you can take action, or you can take some kind of action either on the metaphysical or physical level that's going to fix what's wrong with you. Whereas in reality, for almost everybody, they need to either do one of two things. They need to either cease a toxic behavior of some sort. For me, it was alcohol, which I had to do first before I could do anything else. And if you've got some behavioral thing going on in your life like that, consumption behavior, or maybe you've got an anger management problem or whatever, right? You kind of got to deal with that first. But then the second side of it is acceptance, right? So once you've excised from your life things that genuinely are wrong with you, then it's time to accept who you are and understand that as best you can, so that however you express going forward, it's more informed by an accurate map. It's never a good idea to try to have your identity informed by an inaccurate map. And ultimately, that's my message to the world, and the world is we have, as a species, intellectualized about specific individuals for the entirety of our history using the wrong map, using an inaccurate map of what humanity is and what an individual is. And my core message is this, that heretofore we've compared individuals against a single mean when we should have compared individuals against at least 8 means, that is to say 8 function blind spots, and possibly 16, which is to say all the types. That would be a much more real and fair way of going about understanding individuals, deviance from the mean of humanity and deviance from each other. We don't need to pathologize people for being different, like Teal Swan's doing there by saying, you need self-discipline. I don't know if you need self-discipline or not. You either have it or you don't, probably, is a much more accurate way of dealing with it, right? The idea that you can take a plan, apply it over time, and see change over time accordingly, and have positive impacts from that is no doubt true, and also the strategy of somebody else. And what strategy you have towards the prime directive, seeing your expectations and realities align as much as possible, it's going to depend on your attentional configuration. If you have TE as like a dominant function like Teal Swan does probably, you have a problem, which is you've mistaken your frame bias for a universal when it's absolutely not. And you wreak havoc in the world by telling a bunch of people that this applies to them, and it only applies to a small portion of them. And you have no idea that's even happening or anything, and you don't care, because ultimately this whole project is an endeavor predicated on your desire to have a successful and, businessy kind of project thing. Like Rachel bought her cards. So it's proof positive that she's right. In her mind that, well, it's working, look, I'm selling stuff, I'm way more successful than Eric, see, I'm right. No, you're evil. Or stupid, probably is better. Like, she doesn't know she's wrong. She has no way of even conceiving it, because and now she's locked herself in a corner where she can't learn anything because she's the guru, even though she was never even remotely ready to guru anyone about anything, right? Because that's one of those things you got to master first. She was addicted to avoiding being held to account intellectually right from the get-go. She never stopped that behavior. Now she's maximized herself in terms of being stuck with that behavior, and she'll never learn, probably. She'll never learn anything. And she's going to be guruing wrongly till the day she dies. She has no reason to ever listen to me explain why she's wrong. After all, if your metric is being successful, then you're not wrong. And that's the evil of TE frame projection when it occurs like that, right? But that's why there's this 1-2 thing I was just talking about. Like, first deal with your shit, then be optimal. And the people, Peter, Aga, Winston's mom, the people who are around here consistently, are one of two things. They're either pretty comfortable in their own skin and optimized, or not broken entirely, because they're willing to deal with my very no-nonsense-y, no-bullshit ways, and even if they're in conflict with them, they think it's worthwhile being around here and trying to communicate. Like Peter Ntichi and I feel like he's doing an excellent job of trying to communicate with me, of bridging the gap between us. He's doing a better job of that than I'm doing, and deserves a lot of credit for that. It's like I don't see him as optimal, an optimal version of himself right now, but I do see him as somebody who doesn't have accountability avoidance disorder, who's able to grow, who's able to be honest and vulnerable. And that's the difference between people who That's where goodness and truth and justice lie in the world. When it if Eric Thor, I don't know, it's because I like Eric Thor. He comes around my channel sometimes, and it's like I see so clearly what he needs to do if he were smart, which is excise everything he said. Make everybody saying, look, here's the deal. I've thought about this. I've looked into it a bunch. Eric's right. So I'm going to start talking about Eric shit. The best thing he could do. I mean, this Eric with a C, not K. But when I tell him this, he doesn't take me very seriously, I don't think. And I wonder why that's the case for other personality channels as well. If you want to be right, like, you know, DSP has this whole army of, like people carrying on about his nonsense off on the sides on his behalf. It's like an organization of disinformationalists. For none of those people does it really make sense to function in that capacity, because they haven't actually learned anything. There's nothing there to learn. It's just a bunch of gobbledygook, you know? But the problem is we largely get people who come into YouTube making typology channels who believe when they arrive that they're already an expert. Whereas when I arrived on YouTube, this was not supposed to be a typology channel. When I first started learning about it, I was a learner of it, and it just sort of making videos like, oh, I'm learning this about it, or whatever. And it's not except through the process of now going on 8 solid years of typing stuff, maybe 7, I don't know. It wasn't until the last couple of these years that I really genuinely started feeling super confident, and it's only within the last couple of years that I started making claims accordingly. So for a long time I couched my claims and, well, this is just a taxonomy and blah 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 and stuff like that, but I no longer do. Why? Because I have at my disposal all the correct arguments now, have it well understood, and can win all those arguments. And if anybody who is a typologist out there, I heard, you know, somebody told me the other day that they were reading Cognitive Personality Theory's book. It's like, okay. Look, everybody out there needs to stop trying to reinvent the wheel and acknowledge that what I'm saying over here, that it's round and rolls, is correct to the exclusion of your square and triangular wheels. So, that's what I'd say about that. And that's a longer video than I expected it to be for local news. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. And thanks for watching. I love you all. Thanks for everybody who's voiced their support for me being correct and fighting the good fight. Because I get that YouTube puts me last in line for whatever reason. Client after client tells me, yeah, YouTube first sent me here, then here, then here, then here. Then I found a link to you from some comment in a channel, in some other channel. I was like, YouTube? Hello? What are you doing? If this person's looking for cognitive function information, send them to me. Well, the problem is, Eric, you're not doing what YouTube wants you to do that, and that's your own fault. You have nothing to complain about. That's the other thing I realized when I was answering this stupid questionnaire they gave me yesterday. I realized, like, Eric, you have nothing to complain about. They give you all the tools you need to maximally attain outcomes. You're refusing to use them, and so you have non-maximal outcomes. Well, what do you expect? Shit for brains, you know? So I have no excuses. I have nothing to complain about to YouTube at all. Okay, not true. Mindy's Club I have to complain to YouTube about. Like, what the hell? There needs to be some linkage here between quality and what happens to it, or likeness, or whatever, what happens to it. Most of my shorts never get any sort of chance on the shorts feed. And the last, like, bunch of them, I made a big 48-hour worth of chunks worth of them or something like that. Not a single one of them even got a chance on the shorts feed. It's like they get people viewing them directly, and that's it. And I'll maybe make a video about that later. I don't know what the hell happened, but the point is, if you're not giving shorts feed viewers a chance to look at my shorts and letting them perform accordingly, then in that case, what the hell am I doing, right? It's like, at least do that for each one of my shorts. It's not cool the way the shorts feed. It doesn't seem to, even when I pared back the total number of shorts I was putting up, it still didn't prevent the shorts feed from not even looking at most of them at all. Whereas I have other examples where it seems like, okay, well, they gave it a chance, like 100 looks, and then it didn't catch on. Fine, I get that, but the analytics on the shorts are just like, what the hell? This makes no sense at all. Like, how did I go doing exactly the same thing from 80,000 views in this 4-day period to 300 views in this 48 hours, doing exactly the same thing? It's like, how can it possibly be like that? Like, when I have steady, it's like, so I don't know what the hell's going on with that, but that's a little bit of extra local news. Now this has really run long, almost a full hour. For those of you who made it through the whole thing, thank you. And for those of you who like the channel and are positive and affirming and stuff, I really do appreciate it, because for all of my sauciness, I need people I respect to say, yeah, you're right, or else I just am in this endless cycle of ongoing life prior to now, basically, in which, how INTJs are like, well, everyone's doing everything wrong, and though I'm mad about it, I'll show nothing. ENTP is like, everyone's saying everything wrong, and no matter how much I show I'm mad about it, they don't stop. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.